And going back to Jeffrey Goldberg, the reporter who broke the story because he was added to the chat by Mike Waltz, I think we can partially credit him for that fact that the media is not focusing on why the U.S. is bombing Yemen on Israel's behalf, because Jeffrey Goldberg supports that. He supports that goal. He basically calls the Houthis Ansar Allah, an Iran proxy that wants to destroy the West, and he supports the policy. He likes it that the U.S. is bombing Yemen on Israel's behalf, and that speaks to the corruption of the media here. It's like, and that's why they can't get to the real story here. For him, it's just a like an OPSEC issue. The fact that Mike Waltz jeopardized a U.S. military intervention that Jeffrey Goldberg and most of the corporate media support. No one questions the underlying policy itself, which is bombing a global South country, simply because Ansar Allah, the targets, the presumed targets, are trying to intervene to get the ceasefire that Israel broke enforced.
Yeah, this is a two-part scandal. One, it's a scandal about an illegal criminal war being waged by the U.S. for Israel with Israeli intelligence. And two, it is a media scandal. It's a scandal, a multi-layered media scandal, a scandal about Jeffrey Goldberg, who now Trump officials are describing correctly as discredited and deceitful without acknowledging how or why he was allowed into this chat, which just demonstrates what bungling characters they are. But Jeffrey Goldberg, I mean, he is one of the worst journalists in Washington, worse than that he is one of the most malevolent figures and insidious in that he represents an ulterior agenda, which is Israel's. I mean, he is the most prominent pro-Israel journalist probably in American history, which is why he's also one of the most prominent access journalists and why he knows Mike Waltz, which we'll talk about later. I mean,
and he has a history, of course, of taking part in scams. Russiagate, he was a major Russiagator. He was an Iraq WMD fraudster. He was used by Dick Cheney to launder lies that led to the Iraq War. And the Trump administration has seized on that part of his record to basically call him like a scumbag and all these names. And they're accurate, but the thing is, they're only doing that to deflect from their own screw up, because it was Mike Waltz and no one else who added Jeffrey Goldberg to the chat. And of course, they're not going to criticize Jeffrey Goldberg for being a loyal stenographer for Israel, because that's what they are as well. So it's just like everybody's at fault here, and they're all missing the fundamental scandal, which is bombing on behalf of Israel, which ultimately all of them, whether it's Jeffrey Goldberg or anybody in the Trump White House, support.
Yeah, I want to do the unauthorized biography of Jeffrey Goldberg because he's just a figure I followed for years, and he's also tried to destroy my reputation and pretty much the reputation of anyone who has from any prominent position challenged the Israel lobby. And I want to talk about his relationship, his sort of secret relationship with Mike Waltz, which makes the case for Mike Waltz being fired. Jeffrey Goldberg is the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic magazine. It's probably the worst magazine in America. And it's a mixture of neocon, pro-war politics, and the most cartoonish, culturally woke, identitarian, boutique flavors of the month of the Acela corridor elite. So you'll get, like, on the cover, it'll be Bono drawing Zelensky, an article inside by Franklin Foer about how Jews in Colombia are actually Jews in 1930s Germany, and an article about, what's the deal with all these swinger parties? Why is everyone having swinger parties these days? That's the Atlantic magazine. And Jeffrey Goldberg's the editor-in-chief. He's mainly in charge of the neocon part, but he has a long history, a history that begins really when he was, as a young man, became a follower of Meir Kahane, the fascist Judeo-Nazi rabbi, because Jeffrey Goldberg was constantly bullied as a young man, and it gave him some sense of machismo to be a tough Jew. And he wound up emigrating to Israel, becoming a prison guard. This is a profile of Jeffrey Goldberg written by the Shame Project, Shame the Hacks Who Abuse Media Ethics, which was a project of Exiled, the publication of Mark Ames and Yasha Levine. I contributed some research to this, but this is the most devastating profile of Jeffrey Goldberg that exists. And it's years old. It's like over 10 years old. But, you know, it contains these smoking gun quotes from Jeffrey Goldberg. Here's one on him being a prison guard in a detention camp for Palestinian political prisoners. This is from 2006. It was hopelessly exotic for me. I mean, I'm from the South Shore of Long Island, and then all of a sudden I'm in the Negev desert by the Egyptian border as a prison guard in what's probably the largest prison in the Middle East, guarding the future leaders of Palestine. It was pretty exciting. Jeffrey Goldberg actually admitted in his book Prisoners that he beat Palestinian prisoners. Unlike a Palestinian friend he claimed to have made, I never hit a Palestinian who wasn't already, unlike an Israeli prison guard friend, I never hit a Palestinian who wasn't already hitting me. But he claimed he was a prison counselor. He also was a columnist for the Jerusalem Post. And he wrote a column called More Tear Gas, Please, in which he explicitly identified himself as an Israeli. Jeffrey Goldberg is an Israeli citizen participating in the armed administration of Palestinians. This leaves us, and by us I mean Israelis of goodwill, in a quandary. We administer approximately 2 million people in occupied territories. And then he mocked Palestinian suffering with crude jokes suggesting, for example, Arab women compete in Miss Gaza refugee camp and Miss Mother who sends her children into the street to catch Israeli bullets with their heads contests. Again, this is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. Here's Jeffrey Goldberg in 2002. In 5 years, I believe that the coming invasion of Iraq will be remembered as an act of profound morality. It goes on and on and on. But one of the key takeaways here is that after 9/11, Goldberg became one of the leading journalists responsible for generating propaganda to drum up unfounded fears to scare the public into war with Iraq. He produced a major profile for The New Yorker, asserting falsely that Saddam Hussein had secret ties with Al-Qaeda, which Dick Cheney cited twice during Meet the Press interviews in order to make the case for war with Iraq. He published a fake story about how Hezbollah had penetrated deep into the US and was running a black market cigarette ring on US soil to finance its terrorist operations. He won Best International Reporting for his fake story on Saddam and Al-Qaeda. It goes on and on and on. During the Obama era, Jeffrey Goldberg smeared bloggers at Think Progress on behalf of AIPAC who were opposing a war with Iran. And then he served as an errand boy for Benjamin Netanyahu, publishing a front page Atlantic piece claiming that Israel was imminently going to attack Iran unless the US did it first, in order to bait the US into attacking Iranian nuclear sites. So this brings us to Mike Waltz and the Signalgate group, because this history helps explain how Jeffrey Goldberg got into the group. Let's first just start with Mike Waltz's explanation for how Jeffrey Goldberg got into the group, which is just transparently bogus, before we present what, at least I think, and I'm sure Aaron agrees, is the real reason.
And I know him in the sense that he hates the president, but I don't text him. He wasn't on my phone, and we're going to figure out how this happened.
So you don't know what staffer is responsible for this right now?
Well, look, a staffer wasn't responsible, and look, I take full responsibility. I built the group. My job is to make sure everything's coordinated.
But how did the number? I mean, I don't mean to be pedantic here, but how did the number?
Have you ever had somebody's contact that shows their name, and then you have somebody else's number there?
I never make those mistakes.
Right? You got somebody else's number on someone else's contact. So of course I didn't see this loser in the group. It looked like someone else. Now, whether he did it deliberately or it happened in some other technical mean is something we're trying to figure out.
So your staffer did not put his contact information.
No,
but how did it end up in your
well, that's
phone?
what we're trying to figure out.
Okay, but that's a pretty big problem.
That is what, that's what we've got the best technical minds, right?
That's disturbing.
And that's where, I mean, I'm sure everybody out there has had a contact where it was said one person and then a different phone number.
But you've never talked to him before, so how's the number on your phone? I mean, I'm not an expert in any of this, but it's just curious. How's the number on your phone?
Well, if you have somebody else's contact and then then somehow it gets
someone
sucked
sent
in,
you that
it gets
contact.
sucked in.
Was there someone else supposed to be on the chat that wasn't on the chat that you thought was
so
on
the
chat?
person that I thought was on there was never on there. It was this
who
guy.
Was that? What person?
Well, I'm not. Look, okay. Laura, I take responsibility. I built the group.
Okay.
So but look, that's the part that we have to figure out.
He said Jeffrey Goldberg's number got sucked in to the group somehow. It got sucked in. Sorry, I think you're muted, Aaron.
It makes absolutely no sense. No one has any idea what he's talking about. Jeffrey Goldberg's number got sucked in to his phone and then modified to be under a different contact name. It makes absolutely no sense. He says, I'm sure everyone's gone. No, actually, no one has. What happened was, it's so obvious. Jeffrey Goldberg was in his phone because they're both DC neocons. And despite his claim that he doesn't know the guy, he's a loser, I think they're allies. And that's why he had him in his contact. I don't think this was added deliberately. I strongly doubt that because this just makes him and the Trump administration look so badly. So, but in terms of how could you make this mistake? Well, because he's your ally, he's in your phone, and I'm sure, and they have been in contact before, I'm sure. And despite his claim to not know him, there are pictures of them appearing publicly together. So this explanation makes absolutely no sense. And you don't need a technical analysis to figure this out. What is a technical analysis going to find? It's going to find out that Michael Waltz typed in the wrong name of someone who was actually in his phone because they're a contact.
Yeah. They're going to use AI to determine the sucking capacity of Mike Waltz's phone. Doge is going to investigate.
Well, that sounds like a joke, but literally that is what they're doing. They said Elon Musk is going to lead the investigation. Elon Musk. Okay.
Elon Musk and Big Balls are going to lead the sucking investigation. Yeah. Suckgate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's this is Aaron, you mentioned there are pictures of Mike Waltz and Jeffrey Goldberg together. I mean, this is great. The picture is them viewing a speech by Bernard-Henri Lévy, the fake neocon French philosopher. Of course, he's like 5'2", so he's standing on a podium above everyone, like he's standing on a coffee table. And this is at the Atlantic Ideas Festival. And you can see Goldberg is like right behind Mike Waltz. This is like a globalist cartoon. There they are. In front of some like, I mean, can you imagine what, like, you know, if you showed this to the average MAGA person, how they would respond? Like if you just like tossed this photo into a basket of deplorables. Like they're all sipping white wine, standing in front of a piece of postmodern corporate art, watching Bernard-Henri Lévy, and Mike Waltz looks enthralled, like he's listening to a real French philosopher.
Yeah.
Mike Waltz is ready to like start singing Les Mis and become one of the communards. Jeffrey Goldberg's right behind him as though he's sort of like whispering in his ear.
And by the way,
so what were they doing? Actually, in the original BHL post, I might pull it up. The first comment is by Judith Miller, declaring, "Keep on rocking, BHL." I mean, this is just the clique of neocons that brought us the Iraq War, the scum of the earth. And it's so obvious that the reason Mike Waltz had Jeffrey Goldberg in his phone was because he was leaking to him. Because what are they doing right now? They're mobilizing for war with Iran. And Jeffrey Goldberg is someone who represents the enemy faction inside the Beltway, but who sympathizes with and is enthusiastic for the push for war with Iran. So he's the perfect person to use if you're Mike Waltz to kind of groom to carry the neocon message.
And this is why, by the way, Jeffrey Goldberg not only kept this to himself, he kept the fact that the Trump administration was plotting to bomb Yemen on Israel's behalf. He kept that secret. He only went public after it happened. Not only that, he also left the chat. He left the chat because he didn't want to risk screwing up the plan. He didn't want to know any more details because he was worried about screwing it up. So he voluntarily left the chat like a great teacher's pet because he was on board with the policy. He was fully on board with what Mike Waltz was up to, and he didn't want to know more because he didn't want to mess it up.
It's a pretty important point. Jeffrey Goldberg is being hailed in Washington as a good actor, a good, doing the right thing by not exposing more in this chat, which would have complicated the war effort, because everyone is united in preventing, everyone is united in support of attacking one of the poorest countries on the planet because it's controlled by one of the only entities on earth taking up arms to stop Israel's Holocaust in Gaza. There's no dissent in Congress, except maybe from one member, Rashida Tlaib, against this war. And Jeffrey Goldberg, as we can actually hear here, is fully in support of the war. He was asked about this by NPR of all places. And if you can suffer through NPR voice, this is a pretty revealing exchange that really distills the degenerate pro-war thinking that has encompassed the whole of Washington, even as they freak out over this scandal, a scandal which should be about an illegal war, but which Goldberg has framed as an OPSEC scandal, an operational security scandal.
Okay, and then it is real. I'm wondering now that this has advanced quite a bit. You really are at the center of this story. It strikes me that, maybe many in the media and Congress were focusing on your reporting. There's little talk of the fact that this attack killed 53 people, as we mentioned, including women and children, the civilian toll of these American strikes. Are we burying the lead here?
Well, those unfortunately, those aren't confirmed numbers. Those are provided by the Houthis and the Houthi Health Ministry, I guess. So we don't know that for sure. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't know if we're burying the lead, because obviously, huge breaches in national security and safety of information, that's a very, very important story, obviously. And one of the reasons it's a very important story is that the Republicans themselves consider that to be an important story when it's Hillary Clinton doing the deed, right? So that's obviously hugely important. But yeah, I think that covering what's going on in Yemen, you have an Iran-backed terrorist organization, the Houthis, that are firing missiles at Israel and disrupting global shipping and occupy half of Yemen and all kinds of other things. And the U.S., and the Trump administration criticizes the Biden's response, and Europe wants Trump to.
Or why they're disrupting global shipping.
Do more. I mean, yeah, there's a huge story in Yemen, but Yemen is, as you know, is one of the more inaccessible places for Western journalists. So maybe this becomes like a substitute for a discussion of Yemen. I don't know.
The voice of the NPR correspondent is like nails on a chalkboard. That was one thing I was saying. But another point was that Jeffrey Goldberg is unable to explain factually why the Houthis or Ansar Allah is fighting this war, why they are firing ballistic missiles at Israel or stopping international trade. He refuses to say so. He repeats the propaganda, Iran-backed. And I think he even said Arab-backed, which is just bizarre because they've been at war with the Arab monarchies. And he then just descends into word salad. He doesn't understand anything about the situation, while acknowledging that this OPSEC scandal is a substitute for the real story. but we can't report the real story. We can't discuss the real story because Western correspondents can't go to Yemen to frame it and sell it back to Western media consumers. Well, there are real reporters in Yemen. Pepe Escobar is there. We know what's happening there. There are no Western reporters allowed in the Gaza Strip. Does that mean that we can't report on the Gaza genocide or discuss that? So that's Jeffrey Goldberg's logic there.